All right, so we are going to get started. Thank you very much for joining us. I have to apologize for the past 2 weeks. I wasn't feeling well. I had a terrible cold and other stuff. So now we're back and ready to get going again, at least for 1 week. Next week is going to be Purim, so I think we're probably not going to be able to have a class then either. I think I have that right. I have to look at my calendar to make sure. But keep an eye open. At least keep an eye open for next week, because I'm assuming we will not have a class, but again, I might be wrong about this. So keep your eye on the emails to see if we do or do not have a class next week. But as for this week, again, thank you for joining us back. We are back and ready to go. Let me throw into the chat here. This is our link there. So if you want to review anything or catch up or on anything, please feel free to check out there on our website at portlandcola.org. And all right, so now we're ready to get going. Before I jump into the share screen, let's recap a little bit. I had to do a little review myself to figure out where we were holding. And so we are in the 9th chapter of Kohelet. And again, we're in the larger context is trying to figure out different aspects of wisdom. Okay, that's generally the goal of at least the second half of the book, is trying to understand different aspects of how wisdom works. And one of the things that he told us, and this is what he told us at the beginning of the chapter, is that there's a certain benefit that a person has by being either righteous or wise. Okay, they have a deeper understanding of specific things that other people do not have. And they said, the way he put it is that they understand love and hatred in ways that other people do not understand love and hatred, right? Ahava and sin'ah, love and hatred. So that's a very interesting statement. And instead of exploring that directly, he instead goes on a side point, not really a side point. What he does is, as actually he does very often, is he goes and says, to really fully understand it, we want to look at it from the opposite direction. What does a non-wise, non-righteous person look at? How would they perceive love and hatred? And he gets into this discussion we began last week, and he's presenting it from the point of view of the non-wise person, your average Joe, so to speak. He's presenting the way your average person looks at the world, and he's going to go then and explain why that's the incorrect way of looking at things. So that's where we're kind of halfway in between. So let's jump into the share screen and we can take a look at it inside. All right, and what he said was we did verse 2 last time. Again, that was 3 weeks ago, and he says, but I'll just read it outside. It says that your average person looks at everything that goes on and says, you know what? Everybody ends up with the same fate. You know, the righteous person, the wicked person, the good person, the pure person, the impure person, the one who sacrifices things to God, the one who doesn't sacrifice things to God, the good person, the sinner, the one who swears, the one who doesn't bother swearing. All those people, they all end up with the same fate. Okay, and at the end of the day, everything's all the same. Okay, which is it's not wrong, right? You know, on paper, that person's absolutely correct. Okay, so again, if we were to view the book of Kohelet, as many people do, as kind of a downer of a book, this would be a great source for for being a downer, right? It's everybody ends up with the same fate. Okay, it's all heading towards one terminal at the end. So that's a pretty downer statement. But the way we're understanding is he's saying that this is the way that the unwise person presents or looks at everything in the world, looks at a very black and white way. You know, we're all stuck. We're all heading to one inescapable reality. Okay, mikra echad, as he puts over here. There's literally coincidence, one coincidence that happens to everybody. Okay, no matter what you do, you're not going to be able to avoid that ending, that whatever that is, right? That you're going to be stuck with that. Okay. So he says that's what your average person thinks. And he's going to continue that now in our verse 3, which we're doing this week, or beginning with this week. Okay. So now that again, that was last week's verse, or not last week, our last session's verse. Now this is this week's verse, verse number 3. Okay. And he says like this: Zera, this is bad. B'chol asher na'asa tachat hashemesh, for all those things that are done under the sun. Ki mikra echad lakol, there is one happening, one happenstance for everything. V'gam, and also, leiv b'nei ha'adam malei ra, the heart of people is full of evil. V'holilot bilvavam, and there is foolishness, or almost like a chaos in their hearts, b'chayehem, in their lives, v'acharav el hametim, and afterwards to the dead. Okay, so again, let's read that all. Let's just read the words first again, one more time. Zera, this is bad. B'chol asher na'asa tachat hashamesh, for all the things that are done under the sun. In other words, of all the things under the sun, this is the worst. Okay, let's put the syntax properly. All the things done under the sun, this is the worst. What's the worst? Ki mikra echad lakol, that everybody ends up with the same fate. V'gam, and even leiv b'nei ha'adam malei ra, even or also the hearts of people are full of evil. V'holilot bilvavam, and there again is this almost a silliness, chaos. It's a hard word to translate. We've seen it before. We'll discuss that in a second. In their hearts, b'chayehem, in their lifetime, v'acharav el hamitim, and afterwards in their death. Okay, so again, there is a number of things being stated in this verse, but it's definitely a continuation of that last verse. In fact, he uses the same terminology. If we looked back at that last verse, he said mikra echad la, all these things. There's one happening that happens to all these groups. Here he just says it more simply, mikra echad lakol. There's one happening that happens to everybody. Okay, so again, this is what your average person would look at the world. Okay, in a moment of perhaps a darker moment of thought, they say, you know what? Everybody ends up with the same thing. And there doesn't seem to be anything that a person can do to escape it, to outwit it. And therefore, they say that this simply is ra, that this is bad. This is a terrible thing. Okay, everybody is stuck with the same with the same fate at the end of the day. Okay, there's a number of things also that I think are interesting over here. And kind of in a larger context of philosophy and theology, particularly, is one of the things that struck me about this verse is it actually sounds very similar to certain aspects of some other major religions. This is again the one speaking not from wisdom says this, that no matter what you do, no matter how hard you try, you end up with the same fate. You don't just end up with the same fate here in this world, the chayehem, in their lifetimes, but also v'achrav el hamitim, it also is true in death. Okay, even afterwards in death, that's also true.
Rabbi, I have a question.
Yes.
This sounds like a summary or a repetition of the verse that came before. I'm wondering if there's any significance to the repetition. Typically, when verses are repeated, there's a significant additional meaning that we take from it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there is something specific. You're right. It definitely is in some ways a repetition of the verse before. The verse before actually was a little more descriptive. It went ahead and said that it gave us examples. The righteous and the wicked all end up with the same fate. The one who sacrifices and the one who doesn't ends up with the same fate. So there is that there. So I would agree with you that this verse not only just repeated, but actually got rid of all the descriptions and just said everybody has the same fate. So yeah, I think there is something though that it's adding over here, which it brings into it this idea that it's not only true in lifetime, but it's also true in death. Okay, so that's interesting because presumably we're talking about the fate that everybody has is death. That's usually what I would consider. That seems to be what he would be saying. I think there's something significant to the fact that he says there's this holelot, which we could discuss again in a second, what that is, in their lifetimes and also in death. Also amongst the dead is this confusion. Let's put it as confusion. Holelot itself is actually, it's an interesting word. We have seen it before. It literally it conveys this sense of wildness or going out of your mind, so to speak. It has a good sense also. It could be used in a good way in reference to praise of God, like Hallelujah, right? Hallel, like we read Hallel on the holidays. That's supposed to be a happiness, a joy with God that makes you kind of leave your own faculties, like we consider David, how he was dancing like a wild man when they were inaugurating not inaugurating the temple, when they were bringing the temple vessels into Jerusalem for the first time. All right, so there's that kind of sense of going out of your mind. Again, it could be a good thing, or it could be, in this case, he's referring to it as a bad way. That this factor of the matter of everybody having the same fate, that can make a person crazy in their lifetime and even in their death. Okay, what I was getting to a second ago was that I've always been curious about this and thinking about this since I first learned about it. Amongst the Christians, so Christians, they don't have necessarily a central. It depends on which version of Christianity, but amongst the Christians, there's a belief amongst some of them, the Calvinist doctrine, that people are stuck with whatever fate they're stuck with. There's really nothing you can do with your fate. It's predestination, predetermination. They've got a couple of ways to refer to it. That you're stuck with whatever God decided for you, and it really has little to do with your actions. Your actions make little effect with what your lot is in this world and how you're going to be dealt with in the world to come, which is it's an interesting idea, and I'm not there's no way am I well read on this subject, but I do find it interesting. Calvin himself was forced there because he felt that a person can never make up for all the sins that they do, so it must be that it's all just a big gamble, kind of. That's at least my armchair understanding of it. This verse itself seems to express that way of thinking is not a wise way of thinking. This is the statement of a non-wise person, that everything under the sun, no matter what happens, it all is mikreh echad lakol. Everybody has one fate, or they're stuck with their fate, and whatever they do, they can't necessarily escape that fate. If anything, it's interesting that he marks this as, number one, this is an idea that is tachat hashemesh, that comes from under the sun. Okay, it does not come from God. And anybody who thinks like that is the thought is not a godly thought, so to speak. It is a very this worldly. I'm seeing it from my lower world perspective that I would come to that understanding. And not only that, he labels it as Ra. This is one of the times where he labels something as bad. This is a bad way of thinking. To think to yourself that it's really everybody is stuck with the same. We're all working for the same goal, which is just to make it through. And I think that's what he's saying, is that is the non-wise way of thinking. A wise person would not necessarily say that. Now, we haven't discussed yet what does the wise person say, but in regards to what the average person says, the average person says, look at everything in this world. It seems to me that everything's, we're all working for the weekend, so to speak, the rat race. We all have to, we're all just kind of stuck trying to make it to something. And really, it doesn't matter what you do, whether you're righteous or not, whether you're good or not, whether you work hard or not. In the end of the day, everyone ends up with the same fate. Again, not just in this world, but for example, as those religious doctrines would say, even the next world, no matter what you did here, it makes no difference in the world to come. Which, of course, I mean, let me tell you, in a Jewish, that is not a Jewish concept in any way, shape, or form. At least not a traditional Jewish concept. We are, again, this is not being discussed here, but we are big believers in the concept of repentance, that a person can always make up for anything that they've done that is not in line with their values. We can always realign ourselves with our true values, and not basically, I'll say basically, there's nothing a person can do that is beyond the capacity of teshuvah, of repentance. Again, this other philosophy would say, no, you're stuck. We all have one mikra echad. There's only one fate for everybody. Okay, so again, this verse is the second verse, and as Jacob pointed out, it is very repetitive of that verse before, of verse 2. So verse 2 and 3 are the statement of the non-wise person. Again, it doesn't mean that they're a foolish person or a stupid person, but they are not learned. They're not a chacham. They're also not necessarily a righteous person. Now, that was something we discussed back in verse number 1, is that strangely enough, he seems to indicate that you can reach levels of wisdom just through righteousness, which is an interesting thought that I haven't explored fully. But the idea that you could possibly attain this deeper understanding just through righteousness without wisdom. We'll put that to the side. Again, that was verse number 1, but that itself is an interesting idea. So this is the statement of the average Joe. So what does the wise person respond? What does wisdom state? And that moves us on to verse number 4. And this is one of our very interesting cases where we have the verse is actually written one way. That means if you were to take out the handwritten parchment version of the book of Kohelet, the Megillah, you would find that it's written one way. But when we read it, like for example, when we read it on Sukkot, we actually read it differently. Okay, that's where you see this one word here in parentheses. So the parentheses is how it's written, and the brackets are how it's pronounced. And you'll notice that there's these two letters, the middle letters, bet and chet. They switch. Okay, and we'll discuss whenever that happens. At least in the book of Kohelet, there's a meaning to both of them. There's probably, I would say, what's the primary meaning, which is how it's pronounced, how it's read in public, how most learning was done, most study was done through the oral in the oral way. So that's the primary meaning, so to speak, and then the secondary meaning is how it's written. That itself is actually an ongoing disagreement in the Talmud. Which one is the primary, which one is the secondary meaning, and it has actual halachic ramifications in a number of places. All right, but we haven't even seen what it says yet. So let's take a look at the verse here. Kimi, for who is it? Asher yuchubar el kol hachayim, who is connected to all of life. Yesh bitachon, for that person, there is hope. I'm going to translate that as hope for right now. Ki lechelav chai, hu tov min haryeh hamet. Because for the living dog, it is better than for the dead lion. Right? That's a famous statement. Let's read that again. Ki mi asher yuchubar el kol hachayim, for the one who is connected to all of life, yesh bitachon, that person has hope. Ki lekelev chai hu tov min haryeh hamet, because for the living dog, kelev chai, the living dog, hu tov is better, min haryeh hamet, is better than the dead lion. Okay, so there's a lot of discussion about this verse over here, a lot of midrash about this verse also, and so we'll get into that in just a second. But what the wise person says, or what wisdom dictates, is that there's never a point of no return as long as a person is alive. If you are connected, yichubar, or chaver, that's an interesting word just by itself. Chaver means connection, okay? Chibur means connection. Even in modern Hebrew nowadays, it also means chaver means a friend, someone the person's connected with. When people study together, they learn as chavruta, as study partners. So chaber means connected. So anybody is connected to life, meaning if you are still living, yesh bitachon, there is hope. Okay, bitachon itself is also an interesting word. Bitachon literally means faith, but it's a similar idea. Usually, if I were really to say hope, I would really want to say tikva, yesh tikva. There would be hope. That'd be a little more literal translation of the word hope. But over here, bitachon serves the same purpose. Bitachon means there is safety more than anything else. Bitachon, right? When something is batuach, it is safe. In fact, in I believe in modern Hebrew, insurance is referred to as bitachon. I think that's correct. So like life insurance, right? And it's a term that we use very often in Torah study in general. Is bitachon means faith, often in Hashem, faith in God. But in this case, I don't think he necessarily means that. What he means is that if a person is still connected to life, then there is still hope, there's still faith that the person can hold out. Okay, meaning that in the last verse where he's stating the opposite view, and the opposite view, that view says that no, a person, there's, everyone's working for the same end, right? There's nothing you do, no action you take will help you avoid that eventual end. But he says over here that's not true. Now it's not true that people won't die. We all do. That's just a reality of life. But rather, how a person lives is different. The way a person lives when they are connected to life is different than when they are not connected to life. Okay, there's something there. It's not just simply when a person is living. It's not just when. It's not kimi asher cha yesh bitachon. It's not as long as somebody is alive that they have bitachon, that they have hope, or they have what to trust in. Rather, it's somebody who's connected to life. That person has trust. That's an interesting thing. Again, that's an interesting choice of words just by itself. If a person is connected to life, there's hope. Connected to life means that there has to be some sort of action involved. There has to be some sort of proactive experience that the person is having that connects them to life. It could be literally giving life and through raising children or anything like that. It could be providing life to others by being a source of living for others, of charity or support for other people. It could be, think about it. It could be planting a garden. It could be anything that connects a person to life, to living. That person always has more opportunity. There's always a safety there. There's always a faith or hope there. Okay, so that's again with the primary understanding of the verse. It means anybody who's connected to life, there is hope for that person. The other way of reading it, it would be kimi asher yivacher el kol hachayim yesh bitachon. Somebody who chooses life will have safety. Okay, here the shoresh, the Hebrew word there would be bachar bet chet reish, which would be to choose. So if you ever heard the term bechira, bechira is free will, a very central Jewish concept that a person has free will and has the ability to make decisions for themselves. So that also is I think really defines the other term, is really how I would look at it. How would one connect to life? It would be through choice. It would be through making decisions with the moments that a person has in their life, taking those moments and deciding what to do with them that connects them to life. You almost could read the two together. It's a connection brought about through choice. Okay, I hope that makes sense. Kimi asher yichubar el kol hachayim, or kimi asher yivacher el kol hachayim, when one chooses to be connected to life, to the process of living, that person has hope. Unfortunately, when you see people who are checked out of life, and that person is unfortunately not in the same boat, there's much less of a safety hope for that person. The person wants to be connected to life-giving, to supporting others, to being together and living with other people. And he expresses this in this interesting in this interesting parable, where he says that a living dog, is much greater than a dead lion. Okay, the lion, king of the beasts, that's what we can imagine as being the strongest animal, so to speak, at least poetically. But once it's dead, can't really do much. A living dog, on the other hand, dog is considered, at least in scripture, at least, to be a pretty lowly animal, even though they have their redeeming quality. They have their redeeming qualities in scripture. I love dogs, so don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that dogs are bad. In scripture, at least, they're portrayed as a pretty lowly animal that eats its own regurgitation, and then is not was a lowly animal. Nevertheless, as long as it's alive, it's better than a dead lion. Okay, the king of the beasts that's dead can't really do much. Okay, the sages over here bring an interesting explanation of this parable. They say that the dead lion is actually referring to King David himself, King Solomon's father. So King David, and there's a very famous story that on the day that he passed away, he was engaged in Torah study for the entire day because he knew that he was going to die sometime in that period of time. And so he wanted to, he understood that if a person's engaged in Torah study, they can trick the angel of death. Right, the angel of death can't catch them. So he was busy with Torah study. It was Shavuot and it was Shabbat also, and there was the angel of death went and rustled some trees out in the garden. So David stopped for a second to go check on what happened, and he slipped down the stairs and died. All right, that's according to our tradition. That is how the great King David died. He unfortunately slipped down a flight of stairs, and that he died in that way. And the Talmud relates that it was Shabbat, so there's laws dictating what you are and are not allowed to move on Shabbat, and they're not allowed to move a dead body. And for the safety of his corpse, there was a big question about what they could do to move him, which means that somebody who was one of the greatest people of all time, that's not an overstatement. I mean, one of the greatest people, at least in Torah's view, of all time, that person was, by the time that, as soon as they were no longer living, they had lost a lot of their grandeur. On the other hand, they refer to the Kelev Chai, the living dog. The sages say this refers to an interesting fellow by the name of Nivuz Radan. Nivuz Radan was the butcher, meaning he was the general of Nebuchadnezzar, who destroyed the first temple. And the Talmud also relates in a separate story that this person was a very, very wicked, terrible, again, butcher of not of animals necessarily, but the butcher of Nebuchadnezzar. And when they came to destroy the temple, it says that he saw all the chaos and all the destruction that he had caused, and he had a moment where he suddenly realized how terrible of a person he was, and he went ahead and actually repented. And it tells us that he went and converted to Judaism, and his great-grandchildren were famous Torah scholars. Not just famous Torah scholars, the main Torah scholars of their generation. So it's an interesting idea that you have somebody who was a terrible person. Everything they did in their life up to that moment was a bad idea, was a bad decision, but they were alive. And due to the fact that they were alive, they were able to continue to make decisions. They were able to move on from that. And that helped them become a better person, as opposed to King David, who was a great person. But as soon as he died, there was something lacking. He was no longer the person who he was. He was a halacha question at that point, as opposed to being the king of Israel. He was no longer what he used to be. So this comes to illustrate this idea that in our view, when it comes to life, life is a very, very important thing. We're big fans of living, and living for life, not just living for an eventual, world to come, which is true. We are doing that too. But in reality, we're really focused on trying to live in this world and make the most out of the life that we have. He expressed this a little better in the coming verse. And again, there's another small little verse over here, verse number 5. He says, "Ki hachayim yodi'im sheyamutu." The living know that they're going to die. V'hametim einam yodim me'uma. Sorry. However, the dead do not know anything. Vein od lahem sachar. They have no more reward. Ki nishkach zichram, because their memory, or their memory gets forgotten. Okay. And now again, unfortunately, that we hope that that doesn't happen. We do what we can to remember those who've passed, but in reality, there's much less that a dead person can do than what a living person can do. Life, again, is basically for the living, if that makes sense, to take a statement out of somewhere else, right? Life is for the living. It means that we're supposed to do with our life whatever we can. All right, let's read that verse again. I'm sorry, I always read the verse a second time. Ki achaim yodim sheyamutu, the living know that they will die. V'hametim einam yodim me'uma, but the dead do not know anything. Ve'enod lahem sachar, they have no more reward. Ki nishkach zichram, because their memory is forgotten. Okay, again, this can be a very big downer of a verse. This is another great example of where you can read Kohelet as a depressing book. This is a pretty depressing thought at first glance. It says that those who are living know that they're going to die, and the dead are already, they already forgot everything. Now, that's not what he's saying. I don't think that's what he's saying. I think he's saying, on the contrary, that when we are living, we don't want to be focused on death. We don't want to be focused on that point. There's no amazing, it's not like you get to that point and now let me word this the right way. We're not living to die. We're living to live. And I think that's a very big distinction between how we look at the world, and perhaps maybe some other groups, again, don't necessarily look at the world that way. We live to live. Our focus is here on this world and perfecting the world around us and affecting the world around us and building the things around us. That's an important feature of wisdom. A wise person says, I'm here, I want to do the most that I'm here with the time that I have. Okay, because there's certain things I can't do after that point. I have to take advantage of the time that I'm here right now. Okay. So again, this verse and the verse before, verse 4 and verse 5, are saying a very similar idea, but from a little different perspective. We always have opportunity if we desire, if we choose to connect to life. There's always an opportunity to connect more to life. There's always a way to build and grow closer to, or to make ourselves better, to become more wise, to become better people, to enjoy life more as long as we're alive. That's something that we can do, because everyone in this class is chai, is alive, right? I'm not going to say you're a living dog necessarily. I'd like to think that most of us are living lions in some way or another. But we have to take advantage of that as we have it, because life is very important and a very whatever. Life is everything. Life is everything that we deal with is in life, and so we want to take advantage of that. The wise person says, know the fact that you're going to die, but don't let that affect how you don't wallow in that. Okay, because the dead don't know anything. Okay, you know something. You know that there's time, that there's an opportunity to do with the time that you have. Okay, I actually read the very interesting thing just recently, and I wanted to share it with you. I don't usually read from outside sources in class, but this is just something that I read recently that I thought was very interesting. This is from a book called Halachic Man. It's probably backwards on your screen. But this is Rabbi Soloveitchik from Yeshiva University, who passed away quite a while ago now. And he says, he says something here that I thought was very interesting. So if you bear with me for just a second, I wanted to read this. Out loud. He says, Judaism has a negative attitude toward death. A corpse defiles, a grave defiles. A person who has been defiled by a corpse is defiled for 7 days and is forbidden to eat any sacred offerings or enter the temple. A Nazirite who has been defiled by a corpse cancels his previous count and must carry out the shaving of his head for defilement and bring an offering. The priests of God are forbidden to defile themselves with the dead. He whose holiness is of a higher order than the holiness of his fellow is subject to a more severe prohibition against defilement. Against the defilement he's referring to is coming in contact with dead bodies or with the dead. An ordinary priest may defile himself for his 7 relatives. The high priest, and similarly a Nazirite, may not defile himself even for them. Many religions view the phenomenon of death as a positive spectacle, inasmuch as it highlights and sensitizes the religious consciousness and sensibility. They, therefore, meaning other religions, therefore sanctify death and the grave, because it is here that we find ourselves at the threshold of transcendence, at the portal of the world to come. Death is seen as a window filled with light, open to an exalted supernal realm. Judaism, however, proclaims that coming into contact with the dead precipitates defilement. Judaism abhors death, organic decay and dissolution. It bids one to choose life and sanctify it. Authentic Judaism, as reflected in halachic thought, sees in death a terrifying contradiction to the whole of religious life. Death negates the entire magnificent experience of halachic man. I am free among the dead, says King Solomon. When a person dies, he is freed from the commandments. The customary Jewish practice to act, the customary Jewish practice to act like the people of Lorraine, who removed the tzitzit from the shrouds of the dead, constitutes authoritative teaching. In other words, there's a custom that we have that when we wrap a dead body to bury them, we wrap them in their talit. The man, at least, we wrap the man in his talit, and we do not. We actually cut off the corner of the talit. To repeat, halacha is devoid of any positive orientation to death and burial. On the contrary, it views these phenomena from a negative perspective. One whose dead relative lies before him is exempt from the recital of the Shema, and from the prayer, and from tefillin, and from all precepts laid down in the Torah. Sorry, let me just skip to another point over here. Holiness means the holiness of earthly here and now life. He quotes the Talmud that says, Rabbi Joshua ben Levi says that when Moses ascended on high, the ministering angels spoke before the Holy One, blessed be he. They said like this, Sovereign of the universe, what business has one born of woman among us? He answered them, he has come to receive the Torah. They said to him, that secret treasure thou desirest to give to flesh and blood? The Holy One, blessed be he, said to Moses, return them an answer. He then spoke before him. Moses then spoke to God. And he said, Sovereign of the universe, the Torah which thou givest me, what is written therein? I am the Lord thy God who brought thee out of the land of Egypt. He turned to the angels and said, did you go down to Egypt? Were you enslaved to Pharaoh? Again, what else is written therein? Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Do you then perform work that you need to rest? Again, what is written therein? Honor thy father and thy mother, and thy mother. Do you have any fathers and mothers? Again, what is written there? Thou shalt not murder. Thou shalt not commit adultery. Thou shalt not steal. Is there jealousy among you? Is the evil temptation amongst you? Straightway they conceded to him. God does not wish to hand over his Torah to the ministering angels, the denizens of transcendent world. Rather, he handed over his Torah to Moses, who brought it down to the earth and caused it to dwell among human beings, who reside in darkness and deep gloom. The earth and bodily life are the very ground of the halachic reality. Only against the concrete, empirical backdrop of this world can the Torah be implemented. Angels who neither eat nor drink, who neither quarrel with one another nor are envious of one another, are not worthy and fit for the receiving of the Torah. So he says a lot more in that vein, but I thought it was a very interesting idea, and something that maybe you won't always hear from Torah sources. But I think it's something that's very clear here, at least, and in these verses over here that we're reading, is that life is the wise person the God-centered person is going to be focused on life. It's not a question of death and necessarily how do I get the best, make the most out of my death. It's really how do I make the most out of my life? And that's what's going to guide a person towards becoming a better person, towards finding wisdom and towards growth, is knowing that there's such a thing as death. Right? He says over here, the living know that they will die. However, it's not necessarily making that your focus, but rather making life, living a person's focus. So, all right. So again, that was verse 3, 4, and 5 of chapter 9. Let's go back into the main screen over here. There we go. All right. Again, I have to look and see what's the story with next week. So keep an eye on your emails. I'll try to make sure to let you know